Thank you for coming back. It's been very exciting to have so much positive energy in this room. I always love coming to rooms where there's a lot of change makers. And today we're really lucky to be finishing off the day with big picture thinking. So we're going to introduce the panelists. This should be an exciting conversation. The first panelist that we have is Jim Larimore. He is the Chief Officer for the Center for Equity and Learning, ACT. Jim leads the ACT Center for Equity and Learning, which engages students, families, educators, and communities to close gaps in equity and achievement. The center develops programs, research, and partnerships to improve college and career readiness and success for all students. Carlos Santiago is the Commissioner for the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. Carlos, can you wave? Carlos was appointed Commissioner of Higher Education in 2015. Before his appointment, Carlos served 2.5 years as Senior Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs. He was the first Puerto Rican president of a major U.S. research university, serving as the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he brings over 30 years of experience in public higher education. Up next is Michael Baston. Michael is from Rockland Community College. He is the 7th president of Rockland Community College. He joined Rockland from LaGuardia Community College, where he served as the Vice President for Student Affairs and Associate Provost. Next is Sabrina Sanders, Director of Student Affairs for the California State University Chancellor's Office. Sabrina is the Director of Student Affairs Projects and Initiatives in the California State University's Chancellor Office. She is a under 40 award winner, according to the Long Beach Post, and was named 2016 Woman of the Year by Assembly Speaker Rendon. Following Sabrina is Karen Stout. Karen is the President and CEO of Achieving the Dream and President Emerita of Montgomery County Community College. She is a nationally renowned academic leader in strategies for enhancing student success and completion, data-informed decision-making, and accelerating and scaling innovation, and new approaches to community college fundraising. She is a frequent national presenter and writer on topics ranging from leadership, student success, strategic planning, fundraising, and using data to support continuous improvement. So we're gonna start the panel, and then afterwards we'll have time for Q&A. Okay.
Great, thank you. So I'm gonna start you off with a little bit of a language lesson by greeting you by saying Marawaka, Kobenwa, howdy, and hello. My name is Jim Larimore. The reason I kind of wanted to greet you that way is that my family background, and I think is a big part of my own personal story for how I ended up doing the work that I'm doing today and how I ended up here with you all this afternoon. My family background is Comanche, Japanese, and Scots-Irish Texan. So if there's anyone else out there who might match that pedigree, my family's been waiting to meet you. I'm a first-gen college grad. I was raised in a military family. My dad was a career soldier. I just found out that Carlos and I had actually, our fathers were stationed in the same military base at different intervals in the 1960s and 1970s. And that was, for me, a formative a part of my growing up experience. It's really kind of shaped my view of the world. 4 siblings. I'm one of 4, born in 3 different countries, and we traveled all over. But it was really my Comanche upbringing that I think gave me a sense of being rooted in the world. It gave me a philosophical perspective. I threw out my slides, the things that I had prepared for you all today, based on the thoughts that have been running through my head as I've listened to other speakers and presenters, as I've listened to different people speak from the audience today. And part of that was that I found myself really reacting to the individual strength and the kind of challenges and adversity that people had faced in a way that, as a recovering Dina student, so I started off my education career, I was the director for the American Indian program out at Stanford University for a bunch of years, then went on to be a Dean of Students and Chief Student Affairs Officer at a number of colleges and universities around the country, went on to serve as one of the deputy directors at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so yes, I'm a recovering foundation person as well. And then was recruited to lead the Center for Equity in Learning at ACT. What I heard in the remarks of so many people today is that, which resonated with me as a Comanche man, is that the people in this room are really doing the work of warriors. You're doing the work of trying to help protect people and help people protect themselves so that their spirits can't be broken in what is fundamentally, I think, a pretty sick world, a pretty sick society that we live in, that doesn't value people or recognize their worth and dignity in the way that we should, that doesn't recenter the kind of policies that we have or the programs that we have in place to recognize the needs of the people who we serve today. In my educational life, I've found that there's a tremendous power in being able to use data. So for another data geek in the room, I think there's a lot of power in being able to use data, but I think the combination of data and insight and personal stories is a very, very powerful combination. And I would say that as we think about systems level change, I think some of this is that we have to figure out how to create the narrative, how to redefine reality in a way that really then does position people to make different decisions or see things in the way that the world operates, the way that our institutions and programs operate today that are in fact pretty problematic, right? That and I'll maybe borrow a comment that Russell made as a little bit of a jumping off point for tangent number 1 for anyone who wants to keep track. So for this one, I would say that Russell's observation that the systems that we've inherited or the institutions that we've inherited are perfectly tuned to produce the results that we see today, and that these are results that are pretty reliable year over year. We know roughly what percentage of students will graduate from which high schools and go on to which post-secondary institutions, and how many of which ones of them will actually be there come graduation time. We then have a big problem, which is that when we ask most change makers, and I'll accept the folks who are here on this panel who I think are doing heroic work in different sectors to produce change in all of these regards. But in many places, if you go to the lead person in a building or in a district and you ask them what their plans are to do better this year or next year, often what you'll hear is some variation of, we're going to do the things we did last year, only harder. It doesn't seem like much of a plan. It's definitely not a plan for change. It's definitely not a plan that is going to produce different outcomes for the students who are not very well served by the current systems and approaches that we have in place. So tangent number 2, I'll give just a few stories about this. You can send me bills for therapy after this, because these are stories drawn from my real life as a director for an American Indian program, as a dean of students, and in other areas of my life as an educator. In insight that I got from working with faculty member Luis Fraga, a very well-regarded political scientist now at Notre Dame. When I was in Seattle, Luis was in the provost office at the University of Washington. And we were both struggling with this idea of, so what is the narrative? What is the alternative or the different reality that we want to put out there for people to think about? And Luis told me about a meeting that he had had with the university cabinet at University of Washington, where someone had made a comment about students at UW. And Luis said, I think we actually have to recognize now that there are 2 universities here. And his colleagues looked at him kind of quizzically, and he said, there's the university of the students that you're thinking about, who might be about 1 in 4 of the students that we enroll here. These are the traditional age students who are fully supported by their families, who are here living on campus, who have the kind of typical college experience that we say is what this place is all about. The other university is the university of the majority of our students, who are working 2 or 3 jobs, who are really struggling to make ends meet, who are doing everything that they possibly can, but who have inherited a different level of challenge than we had, than many of us had, who also worked our way through college back in the day. And said these are students who some of our colleagues will describe when they see them first thing in the morning in their first class, sitting in the front row asleep. And the story then, so this is along the lines of tangent number 2, the story then that our colleagues tell themselves is that student probably stayed out too late last night hanging around partying with their friends. That student is disrespecting me. That student is not interested enough in this class to be awake. And he said, what has to be done around that campus, and I would say on most of our campuses, is the disruptive story that says, there's a pretty good chance that student worked the graveyard shift and had to take 2, maybe even 3 buses to get here to be present at the beginning of the morning. And this might be the first time in 12 hours that that person has had a chance to sit in a warm, safe place and just catch their breath. And the truth of the matter is, in education, we really don't do a very good job typically of taking stock of who our students are or finding out what their own stories are. We make up our own stories about them. And what I've heard over the course of the day is that not only does every person in this room, you all have your own stories, you know the stories of so many other people, and those stories need to be told. And those stories need to be backed up by data and evidence and kind of woven together or braided together into a narrative that will catch people's attention and will be compelling enough for us to disrupt the normal way that we do things, or the myth that we can simply get to a better result by being a little more present and doing a little bit more than we did last year. Because we're in a time where changes have to be much bigger and much more dramatic than that for us to get anywhere. One of the most frustrating experiences that I had, and I was glad to hear Russell make a comment along these lines too, so I'll second the nomination of Sarah as university president. In my life as a dean on a small college campus, I spent time with a number of students who were running into problems with financial aid. And I went down the hall to sit down and talk with the director of financial aid, who I think was in her own way a well-intentioned person, but someone who I discovered I had some pretty fundamental differences of opinion with. As the dean, my staff was responsible for maintaining the academic standards of the college. The director of financial aid had decided that the rule that we had on the books, that a full-time student had to be taking at least 12 credits per term, didn't apply to students who were on financial aid. For them, she thought they needed to be taking 15 credits a term, or they would be put on probation or might not be eligible for aid. And when I asked her why, she said, well, you know, we want to get those students to the finish line in 4 years. And I said, so if I was a student here and my parent was able to write a check for the full tuition amount, could I enroll with 12 credits if I was taking 2 science lab courses and I had other major commitments that term? And she said, well, of course you could. I said, so institutionally, you're taking our policy and discriminating against students who are on financial aid. She thought, no, we're not doing that at all. I just want to do everything I can to make sure that those students are there and they can get to graduation on time. And as a dean, I was very happy to say, well, so structurally, you don't report to me. You report to the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid. That dean and I both report to the president. So I'm going to give you a day to talk to your boss before I go talk to our bosses, because either the rule has to be changed and the faculty have to decide that you're the gatekeeper for this institutional policy, or we're going to work with a policy that's on the book. And my team is the one that gets to interpret what that looks like. I come from a consensus-oriented culture. We are very collaborative. When we have big decisions, we will talk endlessly together about trying to make a decision that we think is in the best long-term interest of our people. But I have to tell you that having that little bit of power that day, I loved it. And so I want to second the idea that the things that you're doing with whatever power or influence you have, your job is to do exactly what I have told students to do for the last 30 years, which is that, you know, we have shown up in institutions that weren't built for us. They weren't necessarily structured or put together in ways that had us in the center of people's attention. But our job, being who we are, knowing, and in this I'll go back even a little further, the reason why I invoke the language of my tribal relatives and ancestors is that when I do that, I feel connected to them. I know that I'm not here on this stage by myself. I have generations and generations and generations of my people behind me. They made it possible for me to be here. They wouldn't possibly abandon me in this moment when I'm sitting in front of 400 people who I've just coming to know. But what I've said to my students over time is that they have to remember that too. They are not alone. They're there, they're backed up. There are people who paid the way for them to be there, there are people who are around on these campuses to help them get through. Their job is to become the most formidable warrior for their people and for other people's children that they can possibly be. And I would say for this group, this is, happy to preach to the choir. I think our job is to figure out how to do this at scale, how to do this not only through the sum of our individual actions, but how to do this in a way that is really fairly subversive of the normal order of things, or at least the inherited order of things. We have to network like crazy. If I'm not a policy expert, I need to find policy experts. If I'm not the person who can connect with a student, I need to find people who can do that kind of work. But we each have to contribute the things that we can do and apply them towards a greater vision. And I think that this panel this afternoon, I think our focus really is on how do we take this, how do we continue to grow what has been started here, how do we equip you all to be the most formidable people that you can be as change agents and advocates, and how can we figure out how to create a better world that our children need and the future generations are gonna need. So I will come back probably with more stories later on, drop the first two tangents on you. Believe me, I come from a family and a culture with a long oral tradition. There are many more stories to come. So,
thank you. In solidarity with Jim, and because we both grew up on military bases, I'm going to dispense with my PowerPoint slides and pass the clicker on to Sabrina, who I've taken a look at California's deck of slides, and we'll surrender. So, thank you so much for the invitation, and I need to begin with a bit of a disclaimer. I am not an expert in the field that you have an interest in. That's not what I do. That's not what I focus on. But I have become a supporter of the work that you do. So I want to talk a little bit of how that transformation occurred with three questions. First, awareness. How did Massachusetts system of public higher education and its 29 campuses become aware of this issue? And I have to invoke Sarah's name, because when I was chancellor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I went to Sarah told me at a future convening, she told me that I had been chancellor when the Hope Lab was doing its work in Wisconsin. And I told her, and I know Milwaukee's a big institution with over 33,000 students, but I told her I was totally unaware of that work. Totally unaware of it, in a city that really had significant issues of inequality. When I became commissioner in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, one of the first things I did was go on a listening tour. And the first campus I visited, because it was the closest, was Bunker Hill Community College. And when a commissioner goes to a campus, the campuses parade out, and I wanted to speak to students, and particularly DACA students. I had an interest in talking to DACA students. And when a commissioner goes to a campus, the campus selects the students that you meet with. And they are high-achieving students. They are the 3.5 to 4.0 students. And I sat down with them, and I had a wonderful conversation, and I started to hear things that I had never heard before. 50% of those high-achieving students had been homeless and had experienced hunger insecurity at some point. They talked to me about couch surfing. They talked to me about living out of their cars. And I said, wait a minute. This is a reality that I had never anticipated hearing from these high-achieving students. And I expected them to talk to me about tuition and fees and textbook costs and things like that. And they talked to me about 4 other things. They said, what's keeping us from succeeding in college is hunger and homelessness and childcare and transportation. 4 things that we did not anticipate. So that was part of my awakening. And as I visited more campuses, both community colleges and state universities, I realized this was not just an issue for Bunker Hill. This was rampant throughout our system of public higher education. In one of the most affluent states in the union, in the state with the highest percentage of degree holders in the union, a state that prides itself on its higher education institutions. And I said, this is something that we need to look into as well in much more detail. So just a bit of information about the Massachusetts system of public higher education in a state that has exceptional private institutions where public higher education has always been underfunded. We have 29 exceptional institutions in 3 segments, 15 community colleges, 9 state universities, and 5 UMass campuses, and it's about 260,000 students as well. It's a very decentralized system. Just because I say something doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And that's a reality I've come to learn to live with. Of those 29 campuses, I have 25 separate individual campus boards that I deal with, in addition to the state board that oversees this. Local control is really important. And the funding stream, actually, though bits of funding go through our office, they go directly to the campuses. So I have little control over their funding. I have little control over their decision-making power. I do have a pulpit. I do participate in the selection of campus presidents, and I do evaluate and compensate presidents. And that's not a bad little lever to have. But in this decentralized system, I guess the story is, how did we get all of our campuses to participate in the Hope Lab survey when in fact they didn't have to, and there was some degree of resistance. But after I had done the listening tour, we started to scratch the surface a little bit on the issue. And we conducted a survey of campus staff, largely student affairs directors, and found that 1/3 of the public campuses reported that student hunger and homelessness had increased in the past year. 34% reported an increase in students being served by food pantries on or near the campus. 38% reported an increase in students living with food insecurity, and 45% reported an increase in student homelessness. 24 of our 29 campuses had food pantries on campus or mobile food marts, and 18 of the 29 campuses offered a series of additional support services for students. So there was something going on. The campuses were responding to this, but we were not doing it in a concerted, system-wide approach. So the question was, now that we know that there is an issue on our campuses, how do we address it in a state with very, very limited funding? So there are a couple of things that we did. One is, as we looked at the system-wide goals, we had 7 system-wide goals, and we compartmentalized them down to 3. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to focus on these 3 goals. One was college participation, getting more students into our campuses at all levels. Secondly, college success, getting more students successfully through our campuses. And the third was closing opportunity gaps. And I said, if we can focus on these 3, we can bring into that process hunger and homelessness. And we can do it so as not to create a niche program, but integrate it into the evaluation of presidents, integrate it into the conversation with the local campus boards. So we moved diligently in that direction. It was successful. The campus presidents were supportive. And we proposed then to do the Hope Lab survey. And we wanted all of our campuses, all 29, to participate. One campus said, well, we're a medical school. We don't have undergraduates. We're going to opt out. Fine. Another campus said, we're a maritime academy. All our students have food. All of our students have places to live. It's part of the package. We don't think we have an issue. Okay. And a third campus came back and said, we've created these policies because a previous president was not the best, how would I say, he didn't use the funds of the institution very wisely. So the board created all of these policies to keep that campus from giving resources to students, such as we needed to do the Hope Lab survey. We needed to each campus needed to provide $1,000. And there was still some degree of resistance, but I had a lot of allies. I had two presidents in particular. One you already know, President Ettinger, who was a champion, who I didn't even have to say we were going to move in this direction. She was already blocks ahead of us. She was doing things that we needed to look at very carefully. And the other was a president from one of our rural campuses, Berkshire Community College, President Ellen Kennedy, who basically was heading up the Council of Presidents. And she said, you know, you need to look at our rural communities as well, because hunger impacts us too. And I had other things fall into place. I had the student trustee on the Board of Higher Education had been homeless. And he told his story to the trustees, and he invited his friends to come in and tell their stories too, and it was wonderful. It was a matter of creating awareness among our campuses. Still, financial support has not followed, but that hasn't stopped us from doing this very important work. So, where do we go from here? We're going to do the homelessness survey. I have the majority of the campuses on board. We're going to look at the results very carefully. Again, data is going to drive a lot of the policies. But another thing that we are doing is we're starting to work with other government agencies. And there is an advantage of being a government agency, because you can call on partner agencies, which oftentimes have more resources than you do. So we started to work with the Housing Authority. We started to work with Massachusetts Health and Human Services. We found things out. For example, a full-time student that goes to a shelter in Massachusetts is often turned away because they're a full-time student. It's at the discretion of the director of the shelter. And many shelter directors would say, look, drop out of school, deal with your housing, and then go back to school. And this is not the answer that our students wanted. It was not the answer that helped change their lives as well. So we managed to intervene and to try to change things from that perspective. There's a lot more work to do in Massachusetts. And when I talk to legislators, when I talk to the leadership within the city, there's often not the realization that this is a problem. How can it be? The wealthiest state in the union, innovations, 70% of the jobs require a baccalaureate degree. The economy's booming. Amazon is going to come. There's all of this. GE just came. Now we'll get Amazon. There is a real push that this is not something that public higher education should be dealing with. So we've changed the narrative. We've changed the discourse. I told my associate commissioner who's here, I said, I showed her my my evaluation. The board just gave me evaluation. The chair of the board sent me the evaluation as a draft, and he said, take a look at it, see if you have an issue with it, and get back to me. And as I reviewed the evaluation, positive evaluation, it mentioned hunger and homelessness and the work that we had done. I had never expected our board to acknowledge the importance of that work. So awareness is very important. It is important to keep banging the drum, to keep fighting the fight, to bring students. Students are the most effective exponents of the issues that they face. They know it more than anybody else. So I feel very positive. I've learned an awful lot by listening to you, by listening to the experiences of everyone here. It's been a very good experience. I think while there's a long way to go, I think we're off to a really good start. So thank you.
I can tell you today that if you leave here after these 2 days together and don't have clarity in terms of the vision that you have in your specific context, you will not be able to promote sustainable change. Your vision around the work that has to happen in your particular context has to be crystal clear. You have to be able to articulate what you're going to do. Because if you don't, your institutional context will live in confusion with multiple different ideas of what it is you're trying to do. And so the first key to sustainable change is the clarity of your vision. The second is your ability to make the case in an effective way. Why are we doing this? Because, in fact, if you're not able to, in a way, make the case that is specific to your context, you will always face resilience. You will always face the resistance. If you don't allow yourself to develop the kind of mindset around the specific issues in your context, you will not know what specific skills are needed to accomplish the various elements of moving a real change initiative forward. Of course, you will need resources. And that's not just money, it's time and talent and conversations. And you've got to have a plan. That is so important if any of the work that you're trying to do in your context is going to actually materialize. In my context, I was, for many years, the Vice President of Student Affairs and Associate Provost at LaGuardia Community College. And when I came to the college, I articulated a very clear vision that we would reduce the number of withdrawals of students for non-academic reasons due to unmet needs. I clearly began to talk with the foundation board members about the difference between what it means to have the tuition and the fees as the indirect cost, but to really educate them about the unmet needs that our students have, the transportation, the food, the other things that actually make college possible. And we began to make a case with our campus around the data in terms of who's leaving us and when they're leaving us and why they're leaving us. And because we began to use that data in a very strategic and integrated way, we could say these are the kinds of partnerships that we must have. In 2010, we brought onto our campus Single Stop as the partner that we chose to begin with. And we began to look at how we could use the tools that they had available. And we began to seek other opportunities to develop our mindset, our skill sets. We were able to get a grant from the Benefits Access for College Completion work to begin to think about sustainability, because you're not always going to have all of the resources to do all of the great work that you want to do. But what are the partners that have this interest in this same work that can help you to move the agenda? And I embedded this work in financial aid because I wanted to reduce the stigma of seeking the kinds of public benefits and other supports. And so it became a part of an onboarding process at our institution so that we could normalize and formalize and embed the concept that there are many kinds of public benefits that we all benefit from. We took the faculty and we began to get interns from our human services group, as well as our marketing communication students. And the marketing and communication students did all the ads. And the students in human services did a lot of the public benefits buddy work so that we could make sure that our students were knowledgeable about those resources that were available to them to be successful. Ultimately, the resources, we have to begin to knit the relationships that produce those kinds of resources. But it starts with vision. And that vision can't be just about an emotion. It must be thoughtful about your specific context and the kinds of partners that are available to you and the kinds of end results, the outcomes that you expect to have. With every one of my students, I ask them 3 questions, and it really is their GPA, not their grade point average, but what are their goals? What are their plans? and what actions are they taking to actually accomplish those things. In the work that we do, we must have that same mentality. What is the goal of your specific strategy to address housing and food insecurity? And not only your goal, and quantify it, but not only your goal, what is your plan to actually bring the people together that are going to enable you to actually accomplish this goal? And then, of course, what actions are you going to take over the next 6 weeks, over the next 6 months, over the next year? Because without those concrete action steps, we're just having a conversation. Hope is about goals, plans, and actions. And if we don't do those things, we have dreams. We don't have hopes. And the more that we can get our students, our faculty, and our staff to understand that they can be partners with us in how we address these issues, the more we're able to see the linkages, the more we'll be able to challenge the paradigms and assumptions, that we'll be able to speak about financial insecurity, and homelessness, and hunger, and child care issues and transportation in terms of how do we make college feasible for all college students.
I just want to preface my conversation as well, as I'm not an expert on this. The folks on our campuses, our 23 universities that work with our students day in, day out, the thousands of our students that are experiencing homeless and housing security issues are the ones that are the experts, as well as many of my colleagues here in the audience. So as I share a little bit of information about what we're doing in this issue, I'm going to make sure I introduce and highlight them so that you know who they are, so you can access them, because we all here are resources. We wouldn't be here if we weren't willing to share and support one another, not only the celebrations of what we've been successful at, but also the things that haven't been so successful. So I think that's what we hope to do, and I'm covering a whole lot of information and planting some seeds so that you can come back and ask us more questions or share resources that might be helpful to us in our campuses. The California State University is one of the biggest four-year institution systems in the country, 23 universities, 477,000 students, 49,000 faculty and staff, all the way down to the border with San Diego State, up to the Oregon border with Humboldt State University. Our campuses are one of the most diverse in the country. Over half of our students are students of color. 1 in 3 are the first of their family to attend college, and over 50% of them are Pell Grant recipients. Our Chancellor Timothy White, upon starting at the California State University, went on a campus visit tour and visited all 23 universities. And he heard story after story of students dealing with housing and homelessness issues. And he thought it was just kind of anecdotal stories that were shared from faculty and staff members. And so he commissioned Dr. Rashida Crutchfield, that was on the earlier panel, to do kind of a spot survey of our students. And sure enough, we found out there were significant issues within our CSU system. Dr. Rashida Crutchfield and Dr. Jen McGuire are on to the second phase of that study. And the Chancellor has committed additional resources to help this conversation move along. As you may know, nationally, and especially in the state of California, we are experiencing a shortage, a workforce shortage. And we have moved forward with this graduation initiative. We're calling Graduation Initiative 2025. And our goal is to eliminate our achievement gap. And that is for students that are underrepresented cultural backgrounds, as well as students that are on Pell Grants. So we want a zero gap between those students. We also want to double our graduation rates. And one of these pillars is student engagement and well-being. The Chancellor committed additional resources, and we hired our first director of student wellness and basic needs, and that's Dr. Denise Bevely, who's here in the audience. And we do have, as you can see, there's an intersection of so many topics that have to do with student wellness and well-being. And I want to just touch upon that. When we're talking about student connected to identity, connected to the campus, and if you're dealing with hunger and homeless issues, you are not going to feel part of a campus community. You're not going to feel like you belong to being part of that campus. We're talking about housing, we're talking about safety, financial support, physical and mental health. And so that is one of the pillars when we're talking about our graduation initiative and the bigger picture of student success. So I thought I'd cover some of the pillars that are part of what we hope to move forward. And as I shared, we're not all about just what's happening on campus, but my role of working in a system-wide office is how do we see the big picture. And as we shared, research is one of the big pillars, because with that data, then we can move forward as we speak to legislators, as we speak to taxpayers, as we speak to our alumni, as we speak to faculty and staff and community folks, and we show this data. So we are on phase 2 of the study, and we're looking forward to early 2018 of a publishing of that study that's really going to drive our next steps of our initiative. We had a system-wide conference last year, and we had breakout groups. And there was a breakout group entitled Research and Curriculum. In that room, we had 16 faculty that are all doing different types of research on that. And many of our campuses have human services, social work, sociology, psychology, nutrition, public health, public policy, and there's so many faculty members that have interns, practicum, field work, students that are doing their dissertations or their thesis papers. So how do we bring those folks together and share those resources and engage students in that type of work? We also are looking at other research studies. For example, we did the National College Health Assessment, and Dr. Aiden Nazmi, who's also in the audience, helped compile that data. And as you know, there's a number of national studies that have questions related to students' sense of community or their well-being, and a number of our campuses added additional questions to these national surveys specific about the homelessness and hunger issues. So they found data specifically to their student population that they just ingrained in their current national surveys that they are already doing on a biannual basis. So from a system-wide coordination perspective, and much like you shared with Massachusetts, 23 campuses is 23 diverse personalities. So we don't get into the trenches too much of what happens on each campus. And as you know, the diversity of each campus, the diversity of each region are going to be a diversity of needs. So we want to respect that diversity. We did have a system-wide conference last year, and we're looking at our next one being in February of 2018 up at Cal State Sacramento. And bringing folks together system-wide, as well as some folks from the community college and the UC to talk about this amongst ourselves, release this next study, and kind of start planting the seeds of where we hope to go next. We've also hosted video conferences and other professional opportunities amongst our campuses and highlighted what's going on and what's working. We hosted the USDA at one of our video conferences and partnered with our auxiliary dining services and talked about the EBT dining services resources that our campus, Humboldt State, has been successful at rolling out. So how do we share this information and best practices among campus and outside of, not everything is in the basic needs or student affairs world, but thinking the bigger picture. And then from a system-wide perspective, how can we leverage what type of CMS or student data that we have and get into the financial aid? And we know that FERPA holds us back from a lot of resources, but is there things that we can do system-wide or within our CMS system to access information and forward information, whether it's CalFresh eligibility to students that may meet requirements, or provide resources much like we do with Title IX, or much like we do through orientation with our foster youth or former foster youth. So having those conversations from a system-wide perspective that we can work with all 23 campuses. Legislation and advocacy is a significant part of what we do. We have offices in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., and somebody asked about their getting involved. Our California Student Senate Association, our CSSA, is a student government body for our CSUs, and they wrote a resolution around basic needs. The students feel that this is important enough that they are advocating in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento around basic needs in the CSU. So how do you leverage the right priorities of the campus with your student organizations? We also work with our statewide, national, and local legislation on moving forward this initiative. There's a number of legislation that's driven some of what we've done. For example, we have priority housing for students that are identified as homeless, and that came out of legislation. And most recently, additional funding came forward through the Hunger-Free Campus Initiative, and we'll be moving forward with some discussions on becoming more CalFresh friendly and pushing forward the initiative that for us in the CSU is led by Stephanie Bianco and her team at Cal State Chico for the Center for Healthy Communities. And Stephanie, if you could raise your hand. So partnering with our statewide, our federal, and legislators is a significant part of what we do. So partnering with community agencies, we have had meetings with USDA, with California Social Services, and our housing authorities, and even city agencies. The city of Los Angeles recently passed Measure H, an additional sales tax that will go to combat homelessness. They are expecting $335 million annually. So we have campuses, Pomona, Northridge, Dominguez Hills, Long Beach. How do we sit on these panels and these conversations of funding that's going to homelessness and engage in the conversation on behalf of our students and our campus community? The California Community College is 2.4 million students with 114 campuses, and I saw Colleen here in the audience. Hi, Colleen. The University of California, 238,000 students, 10 campuses, and you heard Ruben speak and Tim. How do we sit together with our colleagues, our sisters and brothers with the UC, the community college, and us with the CSU, and leverage the state as a whole to move forward this initiative? We have over 3 million alumni in the California State University. Our alumni developed a toolkit to share with their alumni associations of how they can increase graduation rates by addressing basic needs. So the larger picture of how do we work together with our campus community, our faculty, our staff, our student government leaders, our neighbors, our alumni, legislators, and our brothers and sisters in our state to address basic needs is a conversation that we're able to leverage as a state. And so I thank you very much for letting us share.
So I don't want to leave Sabrina alone, so I'm going to use some PowerPoint deck that I prepared as well. I'm really, really happy to be back in Philadelphia, and I want to give a shout out to some of my former Montgomery County Community College colleagues who I still think are in the back, and I see Liz Knoll, who is alum in the Alumni Hall of Fame at Montgomery County Community College as well. And Sarah, I don't know if you know this, but Monco was one of the 10 colleges in the first Hope Lab survey. And part of that was because at Montgomery, we really did make this work personal. The why for all of us is personal. And as a leader, and I'm going to build on Michael and Russell earlier, as leaders, we need to figure out ways to make this work visible and personal to everyone around us, including our board members, the leaders on our cabinet, and our faculty and staff. One of the first things that I did at Montgomery was bring back childcare, which had been eliminated by the leadership before me, making a case to the Board of Trustees of why childcare was important in a suburban community college that from all indicators looked very wealthy. But the student issues were hidden. And when we brought back childcare, we really started to see the needs erupt. The best people on our campuses to talk to us about low-income students, food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation issues are our security officers and our custodians. They see these students, they are the first line, they are our eyes and ears. They told my leadership team in a open session at one point that this campus is a safe haven. These students come here as early as the first bus arrives, which was 6:15 in the morning, and they leave when the last bus leaves, and that's 11:30 at night. And yet the college is open from 7:30 until 10 o'clock. So one morning, I decided to get up and be at the bus stop when the students came off the bus, just to find out where do you go? The open computer lab wasn't open, the cafeteria wasn't open. There was one building with one lobby where the students could congregate. So you talk about structural barriers on our campuses. It's an urgent requirement, I think, for leaders to put yourself into the students' lived experience and try to see it. I gave my cabinet bus tokens, and we tried to take mass transportation from one campus to the other campus. Some of them are still lost. No, it was a challenge. So I just want to say those things are really important for leaders to do. So I can't see my slides up here, but I guess you can. Do you see this? So one of the things for me is I became very personally attached to the students' stories and the fact that Montgomery was an Achieving the Dream college, and we were adopting boutique intervention after boutique intervention to try to meet students' needs, including students who were food insecure and housing insecure. And honestly, the boutique interventions weren't moving the needle for any of the students. Those siloed approaches were not working. And that understanding that a fundamental shift in our cultures on our campuses is required for systemic change is what led me to Achieving the Dream. And Achieving the Dream is a national network now with colleges in 39 states and the District of Columbia, and next year we'll be welcoming 2 colleges from Mississippi into our network that helps to support colleges to improve student completion. Now, the next reform wave of this work has to be beyond completion. It's not just that students complete, it's that the new access imperative, that we're reaching students who are in our communities, who economically cannot reach our campuses, but also that students complete with a credential that has a living wage and a family-sustaining wage attached to it, and that has transformational impact for that student's family and therefore the community. So it's much bigger than that. And that's what we need to really understand with this work. You'll see the network spans states that are quite rural and others that have major urban centers. And I do want to say that while these issues seem very similar between urban and rural environments, they look different. In a rural environment, students don't have mass transportation. In a rural environment, there's not broadband access. In an urban environment, it might be that students can't afford broadband access. You think about all the divides we're putting up for our students. And the resources are geographically spread in a rural community. But what I want to talk about are some lessons that we are learning at Achieving the Dream from work that we're doing in our Working Student Success Network. The Working Student Success Network is in 19 colleges in 4 states, and right now is funded by the Kresge Foundation, Casey, Kellogg, Lumina, and MetLife. These community colleges were charged with addressing broad financial insecurities of low-income students by providing information about and assistance in applying for public benefits, offering financial literacy training, and personalized financial and academic counseling, and delivering those services in bundled, integrated ways. The theory being that if we could provide enough support services to students to meet their basic needs and improve their financial stability, the colleges would then improve their persistence and completion rates, thereby helping the economic mobility of low-income students. And the integration strategy of the colleges in the Working Student Success Network is really important. And the intention is to connect work across 3 pillars. The first being helping students develop and follow an achievable and affordable career plan. Michael mentioned this, but not just a career and academic plan, trying to coach students to pursue those types of programs that really do lead to labor market value on the very front end. That was pillar 1. The second was giving students work supports and the third was financial coaching and asset building. What we found out is that the secret sauce to the work was really and the high-performing colleges brought this work into and integrated it into their college systems. It was not a siloed Working Student Success Network project. It was flipped on its head and integrated into the college. While many of the Working Student Success Network colleges used food pantries and started food pantries, and they became symbolic kind of centerpieces of the work, the best college, and they became the place where colleges were, students would come into the food pantry, colleges would ask students questions about housing insecurity, other financial issues, and try to triage support services to the students that came into the food pantry. So the pantries became portals to help students. But the colleges that are the most high-performing colleges moved the portal onto the front end of student intake systems at their colleges, so that those support systems touched every single student upon entry, and then were braided into their advising systems. Many of these colleges are now moving to the redesign of their advising systems. They have a Northeast Wisconsin Technical College probably is the best example of an intake mechanism that then is blended in with advising supports with real-time alerts so that students can be supported with the analytics that were talked about earlier. Oh, you need to get back to the mic. I got so excited I want to see everybody. We found out from WSSN that one-on-one personal assistance coaching, and Justice mentioned that earlier. I was so glad when she said that coach was important to me, that coaching is important, and so is a campus hub, a one-stop kind of center. So the transformational change that is really required, and I like this slide, it's linear, but on our campuses, we need to be thinking about our structures, our processes, and the attitudes in order to really systematically integrate this work into our colleges. So a structural change. Davidson Community College changed their course times to match the mass transportation systems. So that's the example of a structural change. Or you physically relocate all of these services into a one-stop hub, including all of the food pantry and food insecurity kind of work that you're doing. On the process changes, I talked about Northeast Wisconsin Technical College and their intake survey and how they're redesigning systems based on that. And then in the attitudinal change, that really is, we've talked about a couple of those things today. One thing I want to mention is the work of our foundations on our campus, where we're doing private fundraising. An attitudinal change would be that we've educated our foundation boards that to accept scholarship gifts just with donor kind of prescriptive ways to give out the money will not help us reach the neediest students on our campus. They'll only continue to help the students who really don't need the support. So how can we change that? If we begin to change that, that would be the sign of a attitudinal shift. So Achieving the Dream looks at this capacity framework. We think that colleges, in order to integrate fully and systemically this work into their colleges, should be thinking about these 7 fundamentals. And if you look at these 7 fundamentals, the speakers today have touched in some way all the fundamentals. Let me just jump to the 6 facilities. I know I'm between us and questions and then wine, so I just want to make sure that we get to the wine. So in the Working Student Success Network, 3 barriers to adoption. The first, administrative leadership for the work was based in divisions or departments of student services or workforce development without any organizational authority over academic or curricular decisions or work. The second, the need for ongoing and sustained engagement of faculty to generate cultural responsiveness to student poverty and thereby build buy-in for support services that address the wide array of issues that students face. One of the things I love about Sarah's work is the syllabus that every faculty member can put on their syllabus the resources to support students, to help them navigate their way through our campuses. And third, that system-level changes to college policies, practices, and procedures are really required, and that colleges have a limited, not ability, but a limited will to reallocate to support this work. But there are 6 facilitating conditions that we're beginning to see for colleges that are integrating the Working Student Success Network work on their campus. The first is that the executive leaders are highly engaged in the work. The president is making this work a priority. This work is being integrated into student success efforts and student success strategies. It's part of a strategic plan. It's named, it's clear. You hear the president talking about it. The board knows about it. The board can speak to it, foundation board, etc. The president's out making connections in the community with strong partners. The second, the integration of support services is breaking down silos between various student services programs and departments. I like to think about financial aid offices becoming financial services offices. And you think about that paradigm shift. That helps to break down the silos. The third, the widespread collective buy-in and support for the college to provide high-touch coaching to address students' basic needs and improve their financial stability. You see this in WSSN colleges when you talk to academic advisors who already in their mind know they are coaches. They are cross-trained. They're working with students on an array of topics. They're not just schedule builders for that transactional 10-minute conversation. Colleges have really moved into case management models. A growing cultural responsiveness to the conditions of poverty. I like to say that this is abandoning the build it, they will come mentality, because we know that that isn't necessarily correct, but braiding these services into existing work and being more proactive using predictive analytics to support students. The visibility of new food pantries, but not just the food pantry being the portal, moving the portal to intake, and then finally, the broadening engagement with external partners. Many of our Achieving the Dream colleges are partnering with Feeding America. They're partnering with local car repair shops to help with emergency repairs. They have all kinds of creative partnerships. You know, one of the things that we were asked was to say if we could do a couple of things or one big thing, what might we do differently, or what's a crazy idea? And you know, I think that this work really is from the ground up. The crazy idea is to empower colleges to leverage their community colleges, especially to leverage their localness. My wish list is that community colleges would be funded to do the foundation work well, so that we really can operate to be the safe havens that we are really created to be for our communities and our students, and that we could therefore eliminate the need for us to sometimes act like for-profit organizations. And that came up several times today, and I just want to call it out because too often now, because of a lack of public funding, many of our community colleges are leading with a lens around what is the ROI for the college for this particular effort rather than what is the ROI for the student. We cannot lead effectively that way and go back to being true community colleges. Too many of our community colleges, because of that lens, have, for example, eliminated child care centers and other key supports. And then my other big thing would be that we would somehow, as a higher ed ecosystem across this country, recognize that students with a community college degree should be able to transfer all of their credits, full faith and credit, a junior level status, and not lose any credits. These students that we're supporting cannot afford to waste credits upon transfer. So those would be just two easy things to do if we all had magic wands. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions, and I'm going to go on to the floor. So any?
Hi, my name is Lauren Jones, and I teach at a community college. I teach in remedial education, and I feel like that's a topic that often gets overlooked as we talk about all of these systemic issues. So my question to the panel is, how can remedial education and the processes of placement play a role in addressing a lot of this? And as a quick follow-up, if your answer is multiple measures, how can we systemically have a uniform transcript from our high schools to actually make that happen?
Do you want me to take a shot at that? So I would ask you to look at the document, Core Principles in Redesigning Remedial Education Within a Student Success Framework. You've probably looked at that. One of the biggest principles there that I think is really fundamentally important for scale around remedial education is the idea that 2/3 of the students that are currently placing as requiring remediation can be placed into college level courses with the appropriate supports, right? So if we could just begin to, nationwide, just move to that kind of model, then we could spend, and I think we need a research and development agenda around the 1/3 of students who cannot move into college level classes with supports, so that we can really learn together about how to best support those students. So there is a whole research agenda that needs to evolve. I think the next level of reform in Dev Ed also connects to GED students, adult basic education. In many states, the community-based organizations are doing that work. And many of the students that we're talking about today are getting supports from those community-based organizations, right? So we have to figure out a way to better connect and create those kinds of supports.
And I just want us to be careful not to conflate basic skills and homelessness and food insecurity and those sorts of things, because what could be very well-meaning in terms of institutions wanting to address a myriad of issues, you might begin to conflate the two. And as the students that were here today evidenced, in fact, they were very high achievers. Their issue wasn't that they didn't have the basic skills. There were other challenges. And I think that it enables some institutions, by conflating the issue, to choose one versus the other and not looking at how we appropriately address the multitude of issues we have.
If I could just add, when you're looking at developmental education, you really need to revamp the whole structure of it. From placement, you do need to look at GPA in multiple measures. You need to do away with the ridiculous tests that are often used to place students. You need to look at non-cognitive factors. We found that you could that was often more important than other placement tools. You need to look at co-requisites. You need to put those students in courses that doesn't differentiate them, but rather integrates them into the work much quicker. You need to revise your pathways that students take. The algebra pathway is not always appropriate for the areas that students want to go. So you really need to look at this from a holistic perspective, and it makes a huge difference in the lives of students as well.
Hi, my name is Danielle Munoz, and I'm the case manager at Sacramento State. I'm the single point of contact for our students experiencing homelessness and food and housing insecurity. So I have a question, but I'm gonna set it up a little bit. My students teach me more than I think I give them, first. And I try to translate, I'm their voice. I feel like I'm honored that they let me work with them, and I try to be their voice and translate their needs into actual tangible services and programs. And so right now we've been able to create an emergency housing program. We can offer up to 30 days in the residence halls with a meal plan, 2 meals a day. And we meet every week and kind of work on a long-term plan. We have an emergency fund. We can provide up to $1,500 to a student in a one-time crisis. I've gotten bikes donated for our homeless students who might be experiencing significant barriers, like maybe formerly incarcerated or have evictions, that we can at least get them some resources. I'm also working on lockers for our students who are experiencing homelessness because of barriers. They can't take their belongings with them to shelters, and also for students experiencing domestic violence that want to keep their belongings safe. So we want to do lockers, bikes. We've also are working on hotel vouchers for our students who are non-binary and don't want to live in the residence halls in the male or female room, or those with pets or children. So more is needed. I know we want to bring EBT to campus and things like that. So as we're creating all of these, I feel like we're still David and Goliath is our housing market. Really it is. I mean, I'm working with our students and we're trying to get them needs now because that's what they need. They deserve it now. But I think a bigger conversation needs to be had, and that's, I think, where I need guidance and maybe support about this. But how can we work with our housing developers? Because we have, I kind of want to say, predatory housing around our area. They charge students between $900 and $1,000 a month for rent, but students are working with about $900 a month if you factor out how much FAFSA they get, and you divide it by the 5 months in the semester for them. So I'm trying to figure out ways that we can collaborate more with our community and our developers and try to get some kind of support with rent, because as long as rent is going up, our students, it's like we're forcing them to live beyond their means, even with all of the efforts that we have on our campus.
I'll take a crack at this. So, I think one part of this is, as people who work within educational systems and organizations, it's to look outside or kind of look laterally at other organizations and networks that are trying to address the same or similar issues, right? And to think about the strategies that they're taking. So if you take a look at the city of Seattle, for instance, with Microsoft drove up housing pretty steeply there, Google and Amazon moved in, housing has just gone absolutely nuts. There has been some work done with the city leadership in Seattle and with real estate developers and with some support from foundations to change the incentive structure, to require developers to include integrated mixed income affordable housing with any project that they want to take on. Right? So I think that there are some leverage points where you can think about this, but you cannot think solely about the student in college. You could, but I think that the issues are much larger. There were people this morning who referenced some approaches that I think are more along the lines of a two-generation strategy, right? Recognizing that a student who's enrolled at Houston Community College may very well have young children, probably has young children, or that the children that you're working with or students you're working with have parents or other family members who also have needs. So I think taking a much more comprehensive look and then identifying the organizations, agencies that are also working on those types of issues can give you a different way into the challenge.
Just to piggyback on that issue, when I became president of Rockland Community College, one of the first things I did was had a meeting with the Commissioner of Social Services for the county to begin to connect them with my person that's responsible for our connection center, Joe Falco, to begin the conversations of how you work to help our students who are in these multitude of challenging issues. And so part of it is leadership. And if this is not a priority of the significant leaders on your campus, it becomes very difficult to have the kinds of conversations that move it forward. So continue to make the case with your leaders. Continue to build the bridges with other organizations within your locale that ultimately can help you with some of these issues is a suggestion.
The average rent for a one bedroom in San Jose is $2,400 a month. And on-campus housing isn't significantly cheap either. When we talk about that big idea, I think we were all asked to do housing partnerships with the Housing Authority. Cities are required to lay aside so much affordable housing, and there's extra points given to veterans and disabled. Where can we get in the conversation of students, whether that become a federal discussion, because much of those funds come from HUD, or CBC funding, which is federal funding resources, so being at that table. But I know it's an ongoing discussion. I just heard an NPR piece. I've heard 3 people today excited about the potential of Amazon coming to town. And in that NPR discussion talked about the cost of housing affordability, and social services have tripled since Amazon moved to Seattle as a result of the affordability that is no longer there because of the increase of so just something to think about. And we have that discussion, and I live in the city of Long Beach. one bedroom, $1,400 in a rough neighborhood. That makes no sense. And it's not going to get any better. And as we focus on redevelopment and regentrification, and I drove around Philadelphia the last couple days and saw this great redevelopment happening, but you know it's going to happen 5 years from now. Folks aren't going to be able to afford this. So where are those discussions of that balance between, and that's another social justice conference that we can return to next weekend, but just something to think about.
Thanks so much for this great panel. So my name is Verona Shermy. I'm from New York, from a foundation called the Jewish Foundation for Education of Women. And for about 100 years, the foundation has been helping women with financial need go to college. So I'm curious, Karen Stout talked a bit about this, but what's the role of private philanthropy in all this? What would you like those in that universe to hear?
We won't help because we can tell you the students that are having the issues. We can tell you the profile of those students because we watch the students go through their experience at our various institutions. And so we can provide you the sort of key indicators of when that person is now going to drop out of our community. And to the extent that you can help us fund the ways to scale how we can help more students, I think that is a very, very important part of what you can do for us. And since I'm in New York, I'd certainly be happy to talk with you.
One thing I would hope that philanthropy would help us with is when private institutions use public dollars, as they do in Massachusetts, to support students, they use the public dollars first, and they use the philanthropic dollars. They have huge endowments, and the truth is that the public dollars are quite scarce. So, and a third of our financial aid, which is relatively small compared to other states, goes to private institutions. So I would like for the public dollars to be used last. They use the philanthropic dollars to support the students first, and they need to top off the financial aid, then they use the public dollars.
I think there's some great comments about, we have a significant amount of analytics that we're gathering. For example, we can go and look at the statistics of number of students that are doing stop-outs, taking a semester off because maybe they owe some money, or they have that library outdated fees. And we're looking at these things called completion grants. You know, and the average student that took that semester off was maybe $600 that they owed. And the statistics of that student returning back to school, it doesn't always work in their favor. So do we look at some of those analytics data and let's just give you that money so that you don't stop out? Or those emergency funds, let's just give you that $555 to get your car fixed so that you don't stop coming to class because you need to hustle those emergency funds and not be asked a million questions and feel like you're being judged or whatever else is maybe going on in your life. And those emergency type completion grants. And that's something that's part of our big pillar because we're seeing that so often. And it may just be that small amount of money or that one emergency that takes you off our radar.
And I would just add, it's hard there are two, in addition to what everybody said already, two things. I think, Sarah started off this morning talking about the research and development agenda that still is in front of us to get more evidence around how this type of work is supporting student completion, economic mobility, social mobility. I think there's some philanthropy that could go into that. And also there's very little philanthropy right now, I think, going into helping us shape strong scenarios on policy to connect better state and federal policy around financial aid and public benefits.
So this was my question touching on what you just said. I'm from California, so this question or this statement goes out to the UC, the Cal State, and the community college. Without being a graduate student, I've already done the research and have my capstone project done. The one thing that I have found is that what's keeping most students behind financially is the cliff effect. So if you are working with the Department of Social Services and our elected officials and the states and federal, please ask them to address the cliff effect, because so many of the students are having to drop out because of that small additional income that their parents are making or that they are making, and they are not finding it out until the day school starts and they do not get their financial aid check. Or they go to take their kids to childcare so that they can go to school, and they find out that they can't take their child anymore because they made $10 or $30 more than they should have that month. So please address the cliff effect on behalf of the students so that we can continue our education, and $30 or $10 more a month will not keep us from pursuing our education. And that is the biggest plea that I get from students. Besides myself, many, many students are facing that same dilemma.
Hi, I'm Bhakti Rosdati from Mount Hood Community College. We're just out in East County in the Portland metro area. And I'm the STEP grant coordinator there. So I'm just hired, I've been working at the college since 2009, but hired to implement quite a bit of what we're talking about today at our college. Two things, have you ever seen collaborations with employers? As in, I'm seeing a lot of employers in our area starting to offer these basic supports to their incumbent workers because of all the challenging housing crisis and the wage issues. And then also, have you seen any collaboration around incentivizing students to get good grades who are in these categories? For instance, you know, it almost seems like you have to be in this dire state to get help, but then as they start to, you know, progress in their education, any kind of incentive to keep going, keep struggling, getting better grades, achieving more. Because many times, you know, different degrees or certificates really do get you a different wage. And if they keep going further, they're actually going to get better wage and then even be able to sustain that, you know, through generations and not have to slide backwards.
Amelia Parnell with NASPA published a study called The Landscape Analysis of Emergency Grant Aid. She researched 800 different types of completion emergency grant programs around the country. You may want to check that out. And she has a follow-up study that hasn't been published quite yet, but we're using some of that to help guide our conversations as we roll out some of these potential grant type programs, because we want to do it right. And that's part of our hesitation of highlighting some of our programs, because we don't have the data on it. We want to be very intentional and very thoughtful and connect it back to the need for that student, and not just do it to do it. You know, when we started having these conversations and folks talked about their food pantry, what we're doing is not about a photo op. It's really about addressing our students' needs in order for them to move on, whether it's their personal or academic goals for the next time. So I just want to put out Amelia's research, and it's a free, you can download it, and that might be a resource for you to look at.
Amelia Parnell at NASPA. I'll say that in the Working Student Success Network work, I talked about 3 pillars, and one of them is work supports, and that's the piece that is the least developed of the 3 pillars in our Working Student Success Network work. And I think that's because our community colleges have struggled with building systems and structures to support, you know, what I would call really authentic employer engagement, not just in this type of work, but even in, you know, helping us to keep our academic programs relevant. And so that is an underdeveloped area, and I think there's opportunity there.
You know, just add to Karen's point, I think it's underdeveloped, but there are some interesting things that are coming along there now. And in addition to the community college sector, the United Negro College Fund, UNCF, has I think probably now 24 campus career pathways initiative underway. One of the things they are working on diligently is around data analytics. The other is about faculty engagement with employers. Right, to get clear on what it is that employers are looking for, that students should be able to do, or that employers want them to be able to do, not only when they complete, but if they're working while they're in school. And I think some of the challenges then are once having engaged employers or industry associations to really kind of hold on to them to start talking about how do you synchronize work schedules, right? So there are significant numbers of students whose work schedules are not set or firmed up in advance, who then find that there's a conflict that arises that they have to then try to negotiate or mediate. I think there will be some things that may emerge out of future iterations of some research that the Strata Education Network is supporting through Gallup, the polling, Gallup polling people. They just released a report last month looking at sources of advice for students, especially for first gen or students coming from families with lower incomes. It turns out that one of the social capital differences is that if you have had the benefit of growing up in a family with parents who went to college, you get advice about career direction and options from them. You also are more likely to get advice from employers. If you're a first-gen student or you're working in an entry-level job, the likelihood that you have access to those sources of advice drops dramatically. And I think there are those kinds of gaps that we also need to close.
Many of our financial aid offices are strategic in how they utilize their work study. Some of them may be specific to on-campus jobs, and the outreach goes specifically to Pell students. Cal State Long Beach has a research opportunity for students that are specifically underrepresented Pell Grants. So how do you be strategic in utilizing those on-campus jobs that oftentimes have a higher retention rate than an off-campus job for students that are you're addressing the equity issues on your campus?
Okay. Can we join me in thanking our panel?